I come from an education background. I had been a teacher and worked in college, the private college system for a number of years. And then was sort of got working, as I worked more with adults and adult learning, I really got more and more interested in doing facilitation and team building, those kinds of things. And very quickly decided that I needed to have some kind of further learning. So I went off and went to the Leadership Institute of Seattle, the LEOS program, which is a master's in applied behavioral science. Graduated from there in the early 90s. Originally thought I would be a private consultant, external consultant, and but then ran into an advertisement shortly after graduating, where the federal government was looking to hire specifically, actually in the ad said they were looking for an OD person to work with Agriculture Canada in the Human Resources Office here in Vancouver. So that was, then I thought, okay, I'll do that for a few years, see what working as an internal is like. And then 22 years later, still working with agriculture, still doing that, and I just left agriculture a year ago. Well, there were a number. I think it was always a job in which it was being challenged and learning, and there was enjoyable stuff going on. I think the really big sort of interventions that made a difference, I think, one was it's called the National Mentoring Program, which was a national program for the employees of agriculture to be you could apply to be a mentor, you could apply to be mentored, and we developed a matching system to put people together based on interests and abilities. And that program is still operating now after my leaving, hugely successful, primarily because it really caught the imagination and support of the senior management, right up to the assistant deputy ministers. Of that group of 9, almost 2/3 of them all were mentors. And in the system like agriculture, the employee development, and you don't get promoted just because of seniority or those kinds of things. And so it became a system where people could really learn on a fast track from people who were quite knowledgeable, who were at least 2 or 3 levels above you, and and a lot of those people sort of developed a connection that even after they were no longer a mentor and an associate working together, they still talk to each other, they still get together and share ideas. And I was really, really pleased with the whole outcome of that. The other one was interesting because I was tasked with change management intervention with the senior management team in Ottawa to help them through the last downsizing exercise that the federal government went through, which actually ended up with me being downsized. So I got to see what it's like at the other end of that pipeline as well. It was interesting to me as an intervention because it wasn't your standard change management training, expectations, William Bridges kinds of discussions. It was a very practical approach from a senior management level to say, okay, for each individual as a senior manager, what expectations, what's your role? How do you do what you need to do? How do you gather the information you need to gather? And all based on change management principles, but gave them actual action plans to be involved rather than just assuming they would figure it out as they go along. Only as you might always want to see it as a framework to lay their actions onto. In other words, where are we in the whole process? What do you do before you announce the change? What do you do during the middle? That's sort of the chaotic times, and what do you do at the end? So there was like a timed framework that things were laid on, but in my research around, there's very little out there that beyond the sort of talking about timelines, talking about some of the emotional impacts and things like that. There's very little that says, here's what you need to do. There would be things like a lot of the transitional research just talks about having to communicate a lot, which is fine, but at a managerial level, it's like, about what? To who, about what, and when? Those kinds of very practical pieces of information help them a whole lot more than just someone coming by and say, you should communicate a lot. I think there always are. Particularly, the LEOS program is based on family systems. And so a systemic approach is kind of how we were trained, but also it actually fits very well with me. I mean, in my previous lifetime, I was at one time when I first left university, I was a computer programmer. I tend to see the world as how to break it down into small steps to go from A to B and know what the effective steps are to be in between. So when I was able to lay a systemic view, a worldview about how humans interact on that, it just becomes part of how I see what's going on in an organization, part of the understanding sometime of how it works. And it's a funny thing how, I think it comes with just practice. At any one time, I might not be able to say exactly what theory or what basis I'm approaching something from, but often it's in a reflection or in retrospect. I see it after the fact, and. Partly too, what I think is that there hasn't been a lot of, there's no fundamental changes in how humans interact for thousands of years. In the OD world, the research that was done in the 40s, 50s, 60s by some of those early researchers, they found out some sort of practical, basic patterns of how people interact that one can still use. The basics of how groups come together and how they resolve issues and conflict management stuff, change management things, all of those pieces are sort of based on human behavior. So I've always been a big believer in to study that as much as possible, keep learning, but my sense is we don't run into a lot of surprises when we do those things. It's if I learn something and the impact on me is, aha, then I know it's a useful thing, because I don't want, it doesn't help to know the 1 in a million thing that times that something's going to be different. It's these systemic interactions between all of us. There is a predictability that allows folks like Bridges or like any one of the rest of those folks to sort of show patterns, to come up with diagrams, to do those kinds of things. And my experience is that they can be very helpful to get a sense of what's going on. Yeah, it's actually it's a critical question. The response is quite critical to understand. It was something where, I mean, sort of in terms of being internal. Even though I'm an internal, I don't have a particular sponsorship for any of the projects. It's like an external. Even I still have to be able to had to go to ensure that every project, every intervention, everything that happened needed to be. I needed to have the right sponsor in place, and in order to support the program. And I got to say, I think I've more than a few times didn't have either the right sponsorship or the right people in that role, and just watching how, without that support of the right sponsor, just things can just go away. And I think that's probably one of the things in the OD profession is that we do an intervention, we hope that it works, and sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And it's the times when it's been due to a lack of sponsorship, I think, is the ones that are sort of, I would sort of say, I've got to do better next time. And with the federal government, it's like there's a huge layering between individual employees at the front line, say here in Vancouver, through to the assistant deputy minister who's sitting in Ottawa. There are a complex layering in there to know where's the right level to get sponsorship. And that takes a while within the federal government. Too high a level, you can't engage them. And too low a level, they don't have the scope or the range to be able to support whatever needs to happen as part of the intervention. And so knowing your internal system in the government is critically important and takes a while. It's another human system that you want to know who's who and who's playing what role and who are your allies, and sometimes there are people who aren't allies. So. Well, it was, as I mentioned, it was because it came through a downsizing. It wasn't this was not the plan. I mean, I probably would still be working, doing the same thing, although I was within 3 to 5 years of a classic retirement. But it's quite clear to me that I don't want to do nothing. So I've set up a small private practice now as an external OD consultant. I'm interested in doing short-term project things. Not being a full-time worker anymore is the luxury of being at this end of the work spectrum. More that I can pick and choose things that I find interesting. I've also gone back to get my certification as an executive coach, which I find is also an interesting balance between coaching and being a consultant. Consulting and coaching, and sort of consulting as an OD expert or coaching. And there's it's really helping me sort of expand my ways of looking at helping people develop. Well, it's something. Well, it's interesting because it's something I have kept. I was originally part of the OD network back in 92, 93 in those early days, and then sort of as I got sort of caught up in my work and doing what I was doing, sort of drifted away from it, and sort of coming back a little bit more now and seeing the people. And one of the things that I notice, I think, is there's still a sense of we're a bunch of individuals, sort of trying to find our way through contracts and finding work and doing various things, which I would much rather see things done as more of that we support each other, that we all the recent contracts I've got. I structure them in ways that I don't do everything. I don't want to do everything. I want to work with others. I want the synergy and the incredible energy that comes out of mixtures of ideas and having different perspectives. I would much rather be doing that than just sort of filling my work out, my billable hours. And so, because to me, a lot of it has to do with the passion and enjoyment of working with people, whether that's working with somebody on a contract basis or working with the partners as we're approaching some kind of an intervention or something. And one of the other things that I don't know how to make this happen, but I would love to see the world of OD bring in some of the ideas from other professions. One in particular that I think is fascinating is in the world of therapists, of clinical therapists. They have a thing called clinical supervision. And you can have supervision groups. And these are groups of peers that you get together on a somewhat regular basis and can share issues, concerns, get feedback from each other, get feedback and support, help learn to see beyond our blind spots sometimes. And I think the OD world would be perfect for something like that, where it's not, I'm not trying to sell my products, I'm trying to learn. And I can tell you about a situation where I was working with a client and I get completely sucked into their environment, and I'm not leading anymore, they're leading me. Well, how we could maybe work on that and talk about that and find out more about what's going on in me. Those kind of developmental conversations where we have a trusting relationship with each other, where I don't mind you seeing some of my flaws. Because at the end of the day, the hope there is I can not just have those flaws, but work beyond them and become an even a better practitioner. So those kinds of ways of helping each other, supporting each other, sharing what I know, learning from others, because I don't want to just talk either. What I've really learned over the years is there is no shortage of need for the kinds of skills and practices and abilities that OD practitioners have. There is no shortage. One of the things that I've done over the years is I've changed my language. I use fairly simple language. I don't talk about OD generally. I don't use that terminology. I don't necessarily even use a lot of the terminology that OD does, but it's more, it informs my practice. So my elevator speech, if I meet somebody and they say, "What do you do?" and I say, "Well, I'm in the business of helping organizations ensure that their employees are happy to come to work," everyone says, "Oh, we want you to come and help us," because everyone wants that. Whereas if I'm selling a thing, a brand name, whatever, that's a harder sell. It's most people understand how to be, whether someone is engaged or not engaged. They understand the sort of some of the need to reduce conflict. They intuitively understand the need to live in what I would call a feedback-rich environment. In other words, that there's feedback for everyone. Those kinds of things are needed, and everyone wants it. And I think the real challenge then is how to get the right people to the right place so they can do it, and how do we support each other to do it.